My name is Leo, I'm 32, and I never imagined that being too quiet could lead to losing my home. For years, I'd found solace in my solitude, a peaceful existence that apparently became an inconvenience to my landlord. But that inconvenience, that sudden, outrageous rent hike, finally pushed me past my breaking point. If you've ever felt like your privacy was under attack, like your quiet life was being judged, then you'll understand why standing up for yourself, even against an absurd accusation, is absolutely worth it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up, my family was lively. Too lively, perhaps, for my temperament. My parents, Mark and Sarah, were both high-energy entrepreneurs who thrived on constant activity. Our home was a revolving door of friends, business associates, and boisterous family gatherings. The air always seemed to hum with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. My mother, with her radiant smile and booming laugh, effortlessly commanded attention in any room. My father, a whirlwind of ambitious ideas, was always on the phone, his voice a constant presence even when he wasn't directly addressing us, while my older brother, Alex, seemed to inherit their outgoing nature, effortlessly charming everyone. He met with his quick wit and boundless energy. I was the quiet one. I preferred the company of books and my own thoughts to crowded rooms and loud conversations. The sheer volume of our home often felt overwhelming, a cacophony that grated on my nerves. My room, with its locked door, became my sanctuary, a small, quiet island in a sea of activity. I'd spend hours there, lost in the worlds between pages, or tinkering with old electronics, finding a silent satisfaction in solving complex puzzles. My parents, while loving, often expressed concern about my introversion. "Leo, darling, why don't you join us?" My mother would ask, her voice a little too bright, a hint of desperation in her tone. "You spend so much time in your head." She'd try to coax me into social situations, always with the best intentions, but it felt like being pushed into a spotlight I never wanted. My father would try to draw me into his latest business schemes, convinced that if I just applied myself to networking, if I just put myself out there more, I'd be as successful as Alex. He'd tell stories of his own youthful shyness, how he'd overcome it to achieve his current status, implying I should do the same. Alex, ever the golden child, seemed to effortlessly glide through life, mirroring our parents' ambitions. He excelled in competitive sports, becoming the star quarterback and captain of the basketball team, his triumph celebrated loudly by our parents. He became president of every club he joined, his charisma pulling people in like a magnet. And eventually, he followed in our parents' footsteps, building a thriving tech startup straight out of college that quickly became the talk of our family and their social circles. His life was a series of public victories, each one announced with fanfare. While I pursued a career in software development, drawn to the logic and solitude of coding, my family viewed it as a respectable but somewhat safe choice, lacking the entrepreneurial spark they so admired. They'd nod approvingly, but their eyes would quickly dart to Alex, a silent comparison hanging in the air. "It's good you have a stable job, Leo," Alex would often say, a patronizing smile playing on his lips, as if offering me a consolation prize. "But you know, real money is made taking risks." He'd talk about disrupting industries and leveraging opportunities, words that felt alien to my methodical, focused approach. Our family gatherings became less about connection and more about performance. Every holiday, every birthday, was an opportunity for Alex to announce another milestone, another successful venture, another extravagant purchase, a new luxury car, a sprawling vacation home, a massive investment in a trendy new startup. My quiet updates about a complex coding project I'd finally debugged, or a new software solution I'd developed that streamlined an internal process, would be met with polite nods, quickly overshadowed by Alex's latest triumph. I'd learned to anticipate the inevitable comparison, the subtle pity in their eyes, as if my contentment with a stable, fulfilling career was a sign of a missed opportunity, a lack of ambition. The emotional distance between us grew with each passing year, fueled by their unspoken expectations and my quiet refusal to meet them. I didn't want their version of success. I just wanted to be left to my quiet pursuits. After college, I yearned for a space of my own, a true sanctuary away from the constant buzz of my family's world. I found a one-bedroom apartment in a charming, older building downtown. It was modest, with high ceilings and large windows that let in ample light, but it was mine. It felt like a deep breath, a release from years of unspoken pressure. The quiet felt like a physical embrace. The landlady, a sweet, elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, lived on the first floor. She had a gentle demeanor and a kind smile, her movements slow and deliberate. She appreciated my quiet nature, often telling me, "You're such a good tenant, Leo, never a peep." It's a joy to have you here." Her words were a balm, validating a part of me that had always been subtly criticized. I worked from home, my days filled with lines of intricate code and the gentle, almost therapeutic hum of my computer. My evenings were spent reading, losing myself in fictional worlds, listening to classical music, or occasionally meeting my few close friends for a quiet dinner at a small, unassuming restaurant. It was a life I loved, a life that perfectly suited my temperament, a life of peaceful, productive solitude, but change, as it often does, arrived unexpectedly. Mrs. Gable, who owned the building outright, eventually moved into assisted living. The building, her beloved legacy, was sold to a management company. A new landlord arrived, a man named Mr. Silas. From the moment he stepped into the building, his presence was loud, boisterous, and entirely self-important. He was the polar opposite of Mrs. Gable's gentle nature, a whirlwind of aggressive energy. His laugh, a loud, barking sound, echoed through the stairwells, a stark contrast to the quiet dignity of the building under Mrs. Gable. He quickly instituted new rules, new fees, and a general air of disruption that grated on my peace-loving sensibilities. There were new charges for package delivery, for using the laundry room, even a community enhancement fee that seemed to cover nothing tangible. He plastered notices everywhere, his official pronouncements covering the gentle, handwritten reminders. Mrs. Gable used to leave. I kept to myself, paid my rent on time, and hoped to remain invisible, a quiet shadow in the corner, hoping to weather the storm of his aggressive management. This quiet approach, however, proved to be my undoing. The first sign of trouble came subtly. A note taped to my door, not about a late payment or a lease violation, but a generic building update about a new tenant engagement initiative. It seemed innocuous enough, a fluffy piece of corporate jargon. I shrugged it off. Then came the emails, increasingly frequent, about mandatory tenant mixers and community events, wine and cheese Wednesdays, Sunday brunch socials, building-wide game nights. All of which I politely declined, citing my busy work schedule. I preferred my privacy, and frankly, I didn't see why I should be forced to socialize with my neighbors just because Mr. Silas had decided we all needed to be one big, happy, loud family. His office was on the ground floor, directly below my unit, and I'd often hear him on the phone, his booming voice echoing through the hallway, discussing his vision for the building, his strategic initiatives. He seemed to take a personal interest in every tenant's comings and goings, their social habits, something that made me deeply uncomfortable. I'd see him watching from his office window as tenants entered and exited, his gaze lingering. I suspected he was already keeping an eye on me, my consistent quietness standing out in a building that was slowly becoming a hub of Mr. Silas's forced camaraderie, a forced performance of community. The true shock came 3 months ago. I found a formal letter in my mailbox, emblazoned with the management company's aggressive, modern logo. My heart sank. I knew what these letters usually meant, another new fee, another change in policy designed to extract more money. But this was different. The first paragraph was standard, referencing my lease agreement, boilerplate language about terms and conditions. The second paragraph, however, made my jaw drop. It stated, in stark, unfeeling corporate language, that due to insufficient tenant engagement and a lack of active participation in community life, my monthly rent would be increasing by 50%. Upon my next lease renewal. 50%. My eyes scanned the page, searching for a typo, a mistake, a decimal point in the wrong place. But there it was, in bold, undeniable print. The reason for this astronomical hike was my unusual quietness and minimal presence in the building. It was completely absurd, an accusation so outrageous it bordered on parody. I reread it, convinced it had to be a prank, a cruel joke. Who raises rent because a tenant is too quiet? It felt like a personal attack, a direct assault on my preferred way of living, a condemnation of my very nature. I had always been a model tenant, never late with rent, never caused a disturbance, never had a complaint filed against me. My apartment was always immaculate, and I adhered to every rule in the original lease. My quietness was, in my opinion, a virtue, a sign of respect for my neighbors and the building itself, not a fault. Yet, here it was, weaponized against me, twisted into a deficiency. I tried to call Mr. Silas, but his assistant, a perpetually flustered young woman named Brenda, informed me he was unavailable and in back-to-back meetings. Her voice sounded tired, as if she'd fielded similar calls all day. I sent an email, meticulously detailing my perfect rental history and politely requesting clarification on how quietness could possibly constitute a lease violation. I cited specific clauses in my existing lease, trying to find legal ground. His reply was terse, almost immediate. As per the terms of your new lease, which you will be signing upon renewal, we reserve the right to adjust rent based on overall tenant contribution to the building's atmosphere. We encourage all tenants to be active members of the community. Active members? I muttered to myself, pacing my small living room, the letter clutched in my hand. Was I supposed to throw loud parties? Join a drum circle in the lobby? Suddenly, my peaceful haven felt like a cage, my quiet life a punishable offense. The very walls seemed to mock me. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about money, though a 50% increase would be a significant financial strain. It was about principle. It was about someone trying to dictate how I lived my life within the confines of my own home, judging my very nature. It was an echo of all the subtle judgments I'd received from my family over the years, amplified and monetized by a greedy landlord. This time, however, I wasn't going to retreat into myself. This time, the quiet fire within me was stoked to a furious blaze. I would fight back. My lease was up for renewal in 2 months, giving me precious little time to figure out my next move. Moving was not an option I relished. My apartment was ideally located for my work, a short walk to the few places I frequented. And the thought of packing up my entire life, dealing with movers, and finding a new place, all while battling an unreasonable landlord, filled me with dread and exhaustion. But staying, and paying 50% more for the privilege of being judged for my personality, was equally unpalatable. It felt like a surrender, a capitulation to an absurd tyranny. I considered appealing to a housing authority, but the new lease language, however ridiculous, seemed to give Mr. Silas enough wiggle room to claim discretion in setting rent based on nebulous community contribution. He likely had his lawyers draft it to be just vague enough to be legally defensible. I even briefly considered confronting him, storming into his office and having a shouting match, but my introverted nature recoiled from the thought of such a public, chaotic confrontation with a man whose bluster I found so irritating. That wasn't my style. Instead, I channeled my frustration into research, my programmer's mind kicking into high gear. This wasn't just a personal grievance, it was a problem to be solved, a system to be debugged. I delved into local housing laws, tenant rights organizations, and even property management regulations. The more I read, the more I realized that while Mr. Silas's reasoning was outlandish, challenging it legally in a traditional tenant-landlord dispute might be a protracted, expensive, and emotionally draining battle, with no guarantee of success. What I needed was leverage, something that would make him back down, something that would turn his absurd demand on its head. I needed to find his vulnerability. My frustration simmered for weeks. It was a constant hum beneath my quiet exterior. I found myself obsessively rereading the rent increase letter, each time feeling a fresh wave of indignation. Unusual quietness. It was a phrase that felt both insulting and strangely intimate, as if Mr. Silas had been actively monitoring my very existence within the building, noting my lack of noise, my lack of public presence. During this time, I started paying more attention to the building itself, not just my apartment. I noticed the peeling paint in the stairwell, the flickering lights in the communal laundry room, the subtle water stains on the ceiling in the lobby that suggested a deeper, unaddressed issue. The general air of shabbiness was increasing, despite Mr. Silas's grand pronouncements. He was all about tenant engagement and community atmosphere, but he seemed less concerned with basic maintenance and upkeep. I started taking photos, documenting every minor defect, every sign of disrepair, with dates and times. It was a small act of rebellion, a way to channel my anger into something productive, even if I wasn't entirely sure what I'd do with the information yet. It was data, and I understood data. I also started observing Mr. Silas more closely. His car, a gleaming black luxury sedan, always parked prominently in the small, shared driveway, as if announcing his presence. He dressed impeccably, always with an expensive watch glinting on his wrist and polished shoes that gleamed. He held court in his ground-floor office, his door often ajar, his booming voice carrying easily into the hallway as he barked orders into his phone, seemingly to various unseen employees or clients. He seemed to live for appearances, for projecting an image of success and authority, a kind of performative wealth. This was a man, I realized, who valued perception above all else, not unlike my own family. And then, a fleeting conversation I overheard in the lobby sparked an idea, a tiny flicker of possibility. 2 tenants were complaining about the rising cost of living in the city, speculating about how long they could afford to stay in the building, especially with Mr. Silas squeezing every last dime out of us. One mentioned, almost in passing, "I heard he's trying to flip the building once all the old leases are up. Make a quick buck." The words resonated with me, a sudden jolt of understanding. Flipping the building. It meant he was likely leveraged, that his successful image might be built on shaky financial ground, especially if he was trying to push out stable, long-term tenants like me with ridiculous rent hikes. The pieces began to click into place. This planted a seed. What if his confidence, his aggressive tactics, were a sign of weakness, not strength? What if he needed to increase cash flow, or quickly secure higher-paying tenants, to make the building more attractive to a potential buyer, or to service a substantial loan? The more I thought about it, the more plausible it seemed. His obsession with community atmosphere and tenant engagement might just be a smokescreen for his true objective: to force out established, low-rent tenants and replace them with high-paying ones, all to inflate the building's value for a swift sale. This wasn't about my quietness, it was about his greed, his precarious financial situation. My personal offense began to morph into a strategic challenge. I wasn't just fighting for my apartment anymore, I was fighting against a predatory business practice. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I took a deep dive into publicly available property records. This wasn't something I'd ever done before, but my programming skills, my ability to sift through vast amounts of data, proved invaluable. It took some digging, navigating dense online databases, deciphering legal jargon, and making a few strategic calls to the city clerk's office, posing as a potential investor interested in the building. But I found what I was looking for. The building, while seemingly well-maintained from the outside in superficial ways, had a surprisingly complex financial history. There was a substantial mortgage taken out just a year before Mr. Silas acquired the property, and the terms of that mortgage suggested a tight repayment schedule, a high-interest, short-term loan. This wasn't just a casual investment for him. It was a significant, high-stakes financial commitment, a ticking clock that explained his urgency. The records also showed a few minor, but persistent, code violations that had been flagged by city inspectors, mostly related to deferred maintenance in common areas, exactly what I had been documenting with my phone. The laundry room wiring, the stairwell leak, even a malfunctioning fire alarm system that had only received superficial repairs. These were small things individually, easily overlooked by a casual observer, but together, they painted a picture of an owner cutting corners, prioritizing quick profits over long-term upkeep and tenant safety. This newfound information was exhilarating. It was like finding a critical bug in a complex system. I wasn't just a quiet tenant, I was a tenant with knowledge, with leverage. My quietness, which Mr. Silas had weaponized against me, was now my secret weapon. He likely saw me as a harmless, reclusive individual, easily intimidated, someone who would simply pack up and leave. He wouldn't expect me to be poring over public records, piecing together his financial vulnerabilities, connecting the dots. I shared my findings with my friend, Chloe, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer who specialized in real estate law, albeit on a much larger scale, dealing with multi-million-dollar commercial properties. I'd helped her out with some technical issues on her firm's website a few months back, a tricky database migration, and she owed me a favor. After reviewing the documents I presented, her eyebrows shot up, a rare display of surprise from her usually stoic face. "Leo," she said, a hint of genuine astonishment in her voice, "this guy is in a tighter spot than he lets on. He's counting on high occupancy and quick turnover to service this debt. Those code violations, though minor, could complicate any sale, especially if they escalate into bigger issues, or are highlighted in a due diligence report." She paused, a thoughtful look on her face, tapping a pen against the stack of papers. "So, he raised your rent because you're too quiet. That's a unique angle, even for the shady landlords I deal with." "It's absurd," I reiterated, my voice tight with lingering indignation, "and completely unjustified. I'm a perfect tenant. I cause no trouble." "I agree," she said, leaning back in her chair. "But proving unjustified in court is time-consuming, expensive, and a huge headache. What's your goal here, Leo? To fight the rent hike, or something more?" She looked at me intently, sensing a deeper motivation. I looked at her, a new resolve hardening my expression, a boldness I hadn't known I possessed. The initial anger had given way to a cold, calculated ambition. "I want him to regret ever calling me too quiet. I want to buy this building." The words felt powerful, almost audacious, as they left my lips. With Chloe's confirmation, a cold, focused determination settled over me. This wasn't about vengeance, not exactly. It was about justice, about proving that quiet strength could overcome loud arrogance. My initial anger had solidified into a strategic mindset, much like debugging a complex piece of code. I needed a plan, a series of calculated steps to expose Mr. Silas's true motivations and, ultimately, to acquire the building. My ultimate goal of owning the building, a seemingly outlandish ambition for someone who had just been told his rent was increasing for being too quiet, now felt strangely attainable, a logical next step in this unexpected game. Chloe, for her part, seemed to relish the challenge. "This is not your typical landlord-tenant dispute, Leo," she'd said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "It's a hostile takeover, in miniature. We'll need to be subtle, gather more intel, and then strike when he least expects it. Your quietness will be our biggest asset." Our first step was to discreetly gather more evidence of Mr. Silas's mismanagement. I continued my documentation of building issues, but now with a lawyer's precision. Chloe advised me on how to photograph and log everything, from a leaky faucet in the communal bathroom that dripped incessantly to the increasingly shoddy repairs on the aging elevator, which often shuddered and groaned ominously. We wanted to build a comprehensive case that would not only highlight his neglect but also demonstrate how these deferred maintenance issues would negatively impact the building's value and desirability for any potential buyer. We even subtly reached out to other long-term tenants, framing our questions as concerns about general upkeep, and found that many shared similar frustrations: flickering lights, slow repairs, a general feeling of being ignored. They were all afraid to voice them openly to Mr. Silas, fearing retribution. Their anecdotal complaints, quietly collected, added significant weight to our growing dossier. Each complaint, each photo, was a piece of the puzzle, a flaw in Mr. Silas's carefully constructed facade. The next phase involved understanding Mr. Silas's broader financial situation. Chloe, leveraging her firm's extensive resources and network, began looking into his other property holdings, his business loans, and any public records of his financial performance. What we uncovered painted an even clearer picture of a man stretched thin, heavily invested, and desperately trying to maintain a facade of success. He owned several other smaller properties, but many of them also seemed to be under similar financial strain, with frequent refinancing and even some lapsed tax payments in their history. It became apparent that the rent hike in my building wasn't an isolated incident of absurdity. It was a desperate, panicked attempt to shore up his overall portfolio, a ripple effect of his own overextended financial position. He wasn't just leveraging this building, he was leveraging his entire lifestyle, his entire public persona, on a series of risky real estate gambles. This knowledge gave me a profound sense of calm. My quietness was not a personal failing, it was simply a convenient scapegoat for his own precarious position, a distraction from his impending downfall. With Chloe handling the legal and financial reconnaissance, I focused on a more personal angle: what would truly hit Mr. Silas where it hurt? His ego. His image. His need to be seen as the successful, authoritative landlord. We needed to orchestrate a scenario where his bluster would expose his vulnerability. Chloe suggested a formal meeting, requesting a reevaluation of my lease terms based on previously undisclosed information. The goal wasn't to win the battle in that meeting, but to gather more information, observe his reactions, and to plant the seed of doubt, the first crack in his confident exterior. We wanted him to underestimate me, to see me as the same quiet tenant he could easily dismiss. Little did he know, my quietness was now my greatest strategic advantage, allowing me to observe, to listen, and to plan without revealing my true intentions. The meeting was set for a Tuesday morning, in Mr. Silas's overly opulent office on the ground floor. The office itself was a testament to his self-importance: heavy drapes, polished dark wood furniture, and framed accolades for business excellence that seemed to glow with self-congratulation. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, a smug expression on his face, as if my mere presence was an inconvenience, a waste of his valuable time. He wore a crisp, tailored suit, his expensive watch catching the light as he gestured, clearly playing the part of the unassailable magnate. "Leo," he began, without inviting me to sit, his voice a dismissive bark, "I'm a busy man. I believe my letter was quite clear. Your rent is increasing. There's nothing to discuss." His tone was condescending, precisely what I expected, but it only strengthened my resolve. I remained calm, my voice steady, though my heart pounded a quiet rhythm in my chest, a drumbeat of anticipation. "Mr. Silas, I'd like to understand the justification for such a significant increase, particularly the reasoning cited regarding my quietness. How does my personal demeanor impact the financial viability of this building?" He scoffed, a short, derisive sound. "Look, Leo, some tenants are just better for the building. They bring life, activity. They contribute to the vibe. You're barely here. And when you are, well, let's just say your presence doesn't exactly contribute to a vibrant community atmosphere." His eyes flickered with irritation, his patience wearing thin. This was my cue. "I assure you, Mr. Silas, my presence is very much felt within the building," I stated, my voice calm but laced with a newfound authority. "For instance, did you know that the faulty wiring in the communal laundry room, specifically the exposed wires behind the dryers, is a Class C fire hazard according to City Code 202. 4.1, and has been since it was last inspected 6 months ago. His composure faltered. His smug smile vanished, replaced by a slight frown. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice losing some of its earlier swagger, a hint of uncertainty creeping in. And the persistent leak in the south stairwell, the one that's been subtly discoloring the ceiling below for months, it's causing structural damage to the joists below the second-floor apartment, I continued, my gaze steady, refusing to break contact. Something your maintenance logs seem to have overlooked for months, despite multiple tenant complaints. I pulled out my phone, a simple black rectangle in my hand, and began to display the photos and timestamps of the documented issues, scrolling slowly through a meticulously organized album. These are just a few examples, of course. I have a comprehensive log, cross-referenced with city building codes and your own maintenance records. I have spoken with multiple tenants who have also quietly documented these issues, afraid to come forward for fear of retribution. Mr. Silas leaned back, his smug smile completely gone, replaced by a scowl. He shifted uncomfortably in his expensive chair. This is a pathetic attempt to avoid your rent increase, Leo. These are minor issues, quickly resolved. Maintenance issues are part of owning a building. He tried to dismiss me, but his eyes darted nervously to my phone. Minor issues that, if reported to the city with detailed photographic evidence and tenant testimonies, could result in significant fines and, more importantly, could complicate any future sale of the property, I countered, my voice gaining strength. Especially if a potential buyer were to conduct a thorough due diligence and discover a pattern of deferred maintenance and unaddressed code violations. Not to mention, how might a vibrant community atmosphere be affected by repeated maintenance disruptions or, God forbid, an actual fire? The last word hung in the air, a thinly veiled threat, a stark image of chaos against his carefully constructed image. His eyes narrowed, a mixture of anger and dawning realization flickering within them. He knew I wasn't just a disgruntled tenant anymore. I had done my homework. The silence that followed was thick with tension, punctuated only by the distant hum of city traffic. He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, a nervous gesture. What do you want, Leo? He asked, his voice now flat, devoid of its earlier bluster, a hint of desperation creeping in. I want to remain in my apartment, at my current rent, with a guarantee of proper maintenance and a commitment to addressing all outstanding code violations, I stated, knowing full well that this was just my opening gambit. And I want this absurd quietness clause removed from any future lease renewals for all tenants. This kind of discriminatory policy is unacceptable. He stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He was clearly trying to regain control of the conversation, to find a weakness, to assert his authority. But I had him cornered. He had underestimated me, had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness, and now he was feeling the sting of that miscalculation. The man who had dismissed me as too quiet was now listening intently, forced to acknowledge my presence, my very inconvenient knowledge. Mr. Silas paced his office, a vein throbbing slightly in his temple, his polished shoes clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. This is blackmail, Leo, he hissed, his voice low and dangerous, filled with barely suppressed fury. No, Mr. Silas, I replied calmly, my voice steady, projecting an air of unshakable resolve. This is a negotiation. You have a property with a significant mortgage, mounting minor code violations that are now documented, and a history of cutting corners on maintenance. I have detailed documentation, not just from myself but from other tenants, and a clear understanding of how these issues, if made public, could severely impact your ability to sell this building for the profit you desire, or even refinance your existing debt. And I have a lawyer, a very well-connected lawyer, who specializes in exposing these kinds of practices. I didn't need to name Chloe, the implication was enough. He could almost certainly guess who I was referring to, given her reputation. He stopped pacing, his eyes fixed on me, searching my face for any sign of a bluff. What is it you truly want? He asked, his voice laced with suspicion, searching for the catch, the true cost of my silence, convinced there had to be more. As I said, for now, I want my rent to remain the same, and these fabricated reasons for the increase to be retracted. And I want the building to be properly maintained for all tenants. Not just for me, but for everyone who lives here. For now, he repeated, catching my subtle emphasis, his eyes narrowing further. What does that mean? This was the moment. The moment to unveil the true extent of my ambition, to turn the tables entirely, to strike at the heart of his carefully constructed world. I took a deep breath, letting the calm settle over me. It means, I began, my voice clear and steady, betraying none of the internal adrenaline, that I'm aware you're looking to sell this building. His eyes widened, a flicker of genuine surprise, almost shock, crossing his face. He hadn't expected me to know that, hadn't expected me to dig so deep. And I'm prepared to make you an offer. The words hung in the air, transforming the dynamic of the room entirely, shifting the power irrevocably. The man who had judged me, dismissed me, and tried to exploit my quietness for his own gain, now stared at me, dumbfounded, his mouth slightly agape. You, he stammered, a short, incredulous laugh escaping him, tinged with disbelief and a touch of hysteria. You want to buy this building? What do you know about real estate, Leo? You're a programmer. You write code. The condescension was back, a desperate, futile attempt to reassert his superiority, to regain his lost footing. I know enough to recognize a distressed asset, Mr. Silas, I retorted, letting my quiet facade drop slightly, revealing the keen, analytical mind beneath. And I know enough about financial leverage to understand your current precarious position. I have a team of financial advisors and legal counsel ready to move quickly. I can offer you a fair price, a quick closing, and, most importantly, discretion. No messy public disclosures of your deferred maintenance issues, no investigations into your financial practices, no disgruntled tenants coming forward with their stories to the media. I watched his face carefully. The mention of discretion hit home. He valued his reputation, his appearance of success, above almost anything else. A public investigation, or even a lengthy, contentious legal battle, would be a disaster for his image and his ability to conduct future business. He began to sweat, a bead tracing a path down his temple, his perfectly knotted tie suddenly feeling too tight. This is preposterous, he muttered, but the conviction was gone from his voice. His bluster had deflated. I have other offers, better offers. Perhaps, I conceded, a subtle, knowing smile playing on my lips, but are they offers that guarantee discretion? Are they offers that can close as quickly as mine, without months of extensive due diligence that will surely uncover every corner you've cut, every rule you've bent? I had done my research. I knew his other offers were speculative, not firm, and likely tied to extensive inspections and financial deep dives that would expose his vulnerabilities. Think about it, Mr. Silas. You can either fight me, expose your vulnerabilities, and potentially lose a significant amount of money and your carefully constructed reputation, or you can sell to me, move on with your dignity somewhat intact, and save face. The choice is yours. But the clock is ticking on that mortgage. The tables had truly turned. The quiet tenant, dismissed and disrespected, was now holding all the cards. His face was a mask of conflicting emotions, fury, frustration, and a dawning, unwelcome understanding that he was beaten. He knew it. I knew it. The air in Mr. Silas's office crackled with his barely contained fury. He stared at me, his eyes narrowed, as if trying to discern whether I was bluffing, whether this unassuming programmer could truly wield such power. You think you can just waltz in here and buy my building? He sneered, finally finding his voice. A last desperate attempt at intimidation. Do you even have the capital? What are you, a tech millionaire in disguise, playing games? His contempt was palpable, but I held his gaze, unyielding. My financial standing is irrelevant to this discussion, Mr. Silas. What is relevant is that I'm offering a solution to your current predicament. A solution that protects your reputation and allows you to move on without a public spectacle, I calmly reiterated, my voice cutting through his bluster. He ran a hand through his hair again, a gesture of exasperation, his earlier bravado completely gone. He was calculating, weighing his options. He knew I had him. The too quiet tenant had meticulously uncovered his vulnerabilities, and now I was offering him an escape route, albeit one that came at the cost of his pride and a significant chunk of his perceived authority. And what makes you think I'd sell to you? He challenged, a last-ditch effort to maintain some semblance of control, to make me beg. Because I'm not just buying a building, Mr. Silas. I'm buying a problem, and I'm offering to solve it quietly. No public record of code violations. No disgruntled tenants coming forward to the housing authority, no hit to your precious reputation. Just a clean transaction, a quick close, and you can disappear with your profits intact, ready to move on to your next venture. Is there anyone else offering you that level of discretion right now, given your current challenges? He didn't answer. And his silence was all the confirmation I needed. My quiet research, my meticulous documentation, and Chloe's expert guidance had paid off. The man who had tried to exploit my nature was now forced to negotiate with me on my terms. Over the next few days, the negotiations were tense, handled primarily through Chloe to maintain a professional distance and prevent Mr. Silas from trying any more personal intimidation tactics. Mr. Silas tried every trick in the book, delaying tactics, attempting to inflate the price, even trying to add in clauses that would benefit him after the sale, like access to tenant data. But we were prepared for every maneuver. Chloe countered his every move with calm, precise legal arguments, always. circling back to his core vulnerability, his desperate need for a clean, discreet exit. The image he projected was everything to him, and the thought of it crumbling in a public dispute, the potential for scandal, was clearly unbearable. Throughout this entire process, I kept my personal life private. My family, absorbed in Alex's latest business venture, remained oblivious to the dramatic turn my life was taking. They still saw me as the quiet programmer, content in my modest apartment, probably still wondering why I wasn't more ambitious. It was a strange kind of satisfaction, knowing I was orchestrating something monumental from the shadows, a quiet revolution, while they continued to overlook me. This secret operation felt more powerful than any loud declaration. My quietness, once a source of judgment, had become my shield and my sword. And soon, it would lead me to own the very building where it had been deemed default. The day the papers were signed was surreal. The closing took place in Chloe's firm's conference room, a sterile, hushed environment. Mr. Silas, looking considerably grayer and more subdued than I had ever seen him, barely made eye contact. The bluster was completely gone, replaced by a sullen resignation. He scrawled his signature with a flourish that seemed more defeated than triumphant, snatched his copy of the documents, and exited the room without a word, his expensive shoes making a surprisingly quiet sound as he retreated. Chloe just smiled at me, a genuine, warm smile. "Congratulations, Leo," she said, extending her hand. "You're officially a landlord. A very quiet, very effective landlord." The irony was not lost on me. The too quiet tenant, the one whose rent was raised for insufficient engagement, now owned the entire building. The keys felt heavy in my hand, not just with metal, but with the weight of possibility and a quiet triumph, a silent testament to how far I had come. My first order of business was to address the immediate issues Mr. Silas had neglected. I hired a reputable, local maintenance team, known for their thoroughness and attention to detail, starting with the most pressing code violations. The faulty wiring in the laundry room was repaired to code, the persistent leak in the stairwell fixed permanently, and the flickering lights replaced with bright, energy-efficient ones. I invested in a new, quieter elevator system, removing the ominous creaks and groans that had become a source of anxiety for many tenants. I sent out a polite, professional notice to all tenants, introducing myself as the new owner, simply Leo, your neighbor, and outlining my commitment to ensuring a safe, well-maintained, and peaceful living environment. I also included a very deliberate line about respecting tenant privacy and not imposing mandatory community engagements. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Tenants, many of whom had been quietly suffering under Mr. Silas's regime, sent emails and left notes expressing relief and gratitude. Some even tentatively offered to help with minor repairs or suggestions for improvements, fostering a genuine sense of community that Mr. Silas's forced initiatives could never achieve. There was a lightness in the air, a collective sigh of relief. The biggest change, of course, was my own rent. Or rather, the glorious lack thereof. I chuckled to myself, thinking about how Mr. Silas's absurd demand had inadvertently led me to a situation where I no longer had to pay rent at all. My quiet life was no longer a liability, it was an asset, a foundation for a new chapter. I still worked my software development job from home, enjoying the stability and intellectual challenge it offered. But now, I also had the immensely satisfying work of nurturing the building, of creating the peaceful, well-managed home I had always wanted for myself and my neighbors. I realized that my introversion wasn't a flaw, it was a strength. My ability to observe, to meticulously research, to plan strategically, and to execute with precision had allowed me to achieve something that the loud, blustering Mr. Silas could never have imagined. My family remained largely unaware of my real estate venture for a while. Alex called periodically, still boasting about his latest acquisition or investment, completely oblivious to my own quiet, monumental success. My parents would ask if I was still happy with my coding job, their voices still carrying that subtle undertone implying that I should be striving for more, for something louder, more impressive, more like Alex. I simply smiled and said, "Yes, I'm very happy." I didn't need their validation anymore. My quiet triumph was its own reward, a deep, internal satisfaction that transcended external recognition. The true satisfaction came not from a public announcement, but from the simple fact of owning my piece, of transforming a perceived weakness into my greatest strength. The building, once a symbol of my quiet life being judged, was now a testament to the power of that very quietness. Life in the building settled into a comfortable rhythm under my ownership. The quiet hum of the newly renovated elevator, the freshly painted hallways, the prompt response to any maintenance requests, these were the subtle indicators of a positive change, a genuine community blossoming from the seeds of shared appreciation for a well-cared-for home. My tenants were happy, their quiet contentedness a stark contrast to the forced engagement Mr. Silas had tried to impose. I often saw them exchanging friendly nods in the hallways, or helping each other with groceries, a true sense of neighborliness. That didn't require mandatory mixers or staged socials. There was a quiet hum of life in the building now, not the boisterous, forced kind, but the authentic warmth of people who felt safe, respected, and truly at home in their own spaces. My family eventually found out, of course. It wasn't a dramatic reveal, but rather a slow, dawning realization. My father, during one of his sporadic check-ins, mentioned that he'd heard through a mutual acquaintance that the old building I lived in had a new owner. Someone named Leo, he'd said, a hint of curiosity in his voice, quite the quiet type. Apparently. Good for him. I just smiled, letting him connect the dots. Later, Alex, ever the one to sniff out a potential business opportunity, started asking more pointed questions. Heard you bought your building, Leo? Is that true? Why didn't you tell me? We could have partnered up. Think of the synergies. His voice held a mix of genuine surprise and a hint of annoyance that I had acted independently, without his expert consultation. It just happened quickly, I'd replied, downplaying the strategic months of planning, keeping my quiet power to myself. My parents, for their part, seemed genuinely impressed, albeit bewildered. Our Leo, a landlord? Who would have thought? My mother had exclaimed, her voice still holding that familiar tone of surprise. You always kept such a low profile. It was a curious form of validation, still framed by their perception of me, but progressed nonetheless. It wasn't a grand apology for years of overlooking me, but it was an acknowledgement of my capability, and for now, that was enough. The most satisfying interaction came months later. I was in the lobby, checking on a new, environmentally friendly recycling system I'd implemented, when Mr. Silas unexpectedly walked in. He looked older, more haggard, the sharp edges of his tailored suits seeming softer, less imposing. He was clearly there for some forgotten paperwork from his old office, now occupied by my calm, efficient building manager. He spotted me, and his eyes widened in recognition, a flash of something akin to defeat crossing his face. Leo, he said, a forced cordiality in his tone, the words clearly difficult to utter. I heard, congratulations on the purchase. Quite the turnaround. His voice was strained, laced with a bitterness he tried to conceal. Thank you, Mr. Silas, I replied, my voice calm and even, a quiet confidence resonating within it. The building is doing quite well. The tenants are happy. Funny, isn't it? All those concerns about quietness and engagement. Seems a peaceful, well-maintained environment is what people truly want after all. He bristled, his old arrogance flickering back for a moment, a last gasp of his former self. Every building has its challenges, he muttered, trying to regain some footing, some shred of his lost authority. Indeed, I agreed, a subtle smile playing on my lips. But some challenges are self-created, wouldn't you agree? Anyway, I hope your new ventures are less demanding of your tenants' personalities. And perhaps you'll find that a quiet, honest approach can be far more profitable in the long run. He flushed, realizing the subtle barb, the precise nature of my victory. He said nothing more, simply turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped, disappearing out the door. He had judged me for my quiet nature, tried to profit from it, and in doing so, had paved the way for me to take over what he saw as his kingdom. The quiet victory was mine. It wasn't just about owning the building, it was about reclaiming my narrative, proving that my way of being, my chosen path, was not only valid but powerfully effective. The irony of it all continued to be a silent chuckle in my mind, a constant reminder of the strength found in stillness. Why life now feels more balanced, more genuinely mine than ever before. My work as a software developer continues to be fulfilling, offering the intellectual quietude I thrive on. But now, I also have the added layer of being a property owner, a landlord who genuinely cares about the people living in his building, who understands that a home is more than just a financial asset. The lessons learned from Mr. Silas were invaluable. True value isn't always loud or flashy, sometimes, it's found in the quiet strength of conviction and meticulous planning. I've come to appreciate that my quiet nature isn't a weakness to be overcome, but a wellspring of observation, focus, and strategic thinking. It's a part of who I am, and it led me to this unexpected triumph, this quiet revolution. If you've ever felt underestimated, judged for being different, or had to fight for your right to live authentically, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. How did you stand up for yourself? Did you find your own quiet victory? Remember to like and subscribe if this resonated with you. We're building a community here of people who choose authenticity over appearance, and your voice matters. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the path to owning your power starts with being too quiet.